the Gentlementor.
I think the best advice is what you started saying from the very beginning. Be prepared for this. That's the best parenting advice anybody can give. Hey, I just
Well,
want to let you know you need to be prepared for this. Here's how it usually goes. Here's worst case scenario. Here's best case scenario. But here's typically where it goes. It's usually right in this
yeah,
percentile. Here you
you're
go.
you're dealing with human beings, so there's always variables. But
And
yeah.
then like you said, you've had that conversation now with Kelly, and his child's a couple years old now. He in the next 12 years, he's going to go. You're right, Doug. And
We
I've thought
started
about it, and he's got this time to manage it. Go ahead.
Here, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we started talking about this, and that's all I've been able to think about. Like, when we talk about fatherhood, there's so much. Where do we start with this? And that's the one thing that keeps coming back to me is like all the stuff I wish I would have known, all the stuff like that. You don't see it coming. You don't know that one day you're going to wake up and it's a different person. I'm pretty sure it's a different person.
It is. It is.
And there's lots of stuff like that. So that's kind of what I've been like clanging my brain about. It's like, okay, well, what are things like that in fatherhood that you don't see coming?
Right.
And so trying to think like early on, and I think like beginning father advice, one of the best things we were ever told was by the nurse who's, they give you the little, here's how to not ruin your child when you take it home. That little meeting you have for like 20 minutes before you leave the hospital, because that's all you need. About 20 minutes, we'll be able to explain
20 minutes ought to do it.
We'll be able to explain this all to you. And so she said, when you take this child home, do not spend your concern or effort in trying to make this child comfortable. Let this child learn to be comfortable with what you are comfortable with. You are the standard. You decide what is comfortable. If you have the music loud and you like the music loud, play the music loud. So the child will get used to it. Yeah. If you got dogs that bark, don't get on the dogs every time they bark around the kid. If it scares the kid, let them bark. The kid will get used to it. If you like the air conditioning really cold, leave it really cold. The kid will get used to it. Most people get that kid and they take it home and they reconstruct their entire lives around this kid. And then a year later, you got people complaining because, well, one of my favorite complaints of all time is that kid can hear elastic snap a mile away. I want to take my kid and I'm so afraid I got to have him sleep in my bed. Like, this is a terrible decision. Mm-hmm. There may be occasions where you take that child into your bed, but do not make that the norm. If you're a husband, do not let that be a norm. Break that up. Yes. That has ruined a lot. It has ruined families. But it's made a lot of child raising much more difficult than it needed to be because somebody thinks we got to keep that baby right with us.
Amen, brother.
Those babies are extremely resilient individuals.
They are. They'll bounce back. They'll be okay. That's really good advice. That is really good. I like.
Well, that's like I said. That's the best pre-child, like early childhood advice that we got, and we live by that. And like, our kids are still to this day. They are not always because they're my kids, but they tend to be pretty flexible. Yeah. We've had lots of conversations about, look, we're somewhere and somebody's hungry. You've been here. You know how this goes. Yeah. And so we stop and we have this conversation. Hey, guess what? You're on the team. We hear you, understand your condition. Please understand, everyone on the team feels the same way. We're all hungry and we'd like to have something to eat. But we also realize that continually complaining about it doesn't really help anyone. So we hear you, duly noted. As soon as food's available, we'll get it to you. And so there is this kind of idea in their mind, and completely accidental. It's not like a great parenting thing. This is something that happened accidentally that is great rewards long term, is that they have learned, like when we're in a difficult situation, that complaining doesn't help. Making demands doesn't help. Yeah. The best thing to do is just chill out. Yeah. And get patient. Put your patient pants on because it might be a minute. And they're pretty good about that. They'll get worked up about stuff, but they can, it's like, remember, we're all here together. We're all feeling the same thing. It's not just you. Oh yeah, okay. So there's that. Like I said, I'm just trying to think. Like, man, when they were that little. You know, the only thing that seems surprising now is like when you have like that senior dad moment, you have that, oh, when you were this big and I could hold you right here and now you're enormous and you want things.
Yeah.
And it's like, those are, you know, well, Mozo and the kid at the bus stop last couple weeks ago, I'm like, get ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're crying on the small end. You will cry on the big end too.
I'm trying to think too. What are the things that I've heard?
You got all that Joe McGee knowledge. You ought to have,
It's Joe McGee.
between Joe McGee and your own experiences, you ought to just be an unstoppable well of living fatherly water.
That's the problem. When I try to draw that water out, I can't get the bucket deep enough.
It's weird, isn't it? It's almost like it's like some of it's blocked out or something. Like it was too traumatic, and my mind just won't let me go back there.
Right. Yeah.
But that's that's my two big memories of being a father, are that I felt just completely unprepared. I mean, I knew what I was doing. I understood the mechanics of the deal. But you're not just taking care of the physical needs of, you are forming another human being.
Yeah.
And eventually they will turn out in a specific way, and then you will begin to deal with the fact that, like, okay, how much did I influence that? How much of that's genetic and how much of that is what they saw me do? And let me tell you, buddy, that answer right there will take sleep out of your ability.
Well, and it's hard to disseminate that sometimes too, those two different things. I remember what it was. I was thinking of. Someone told me more recently, the past few years, a pastor that I worked for, he said you have to think of children as an investment and not ownership. So you don't own them, because as an owner, you take full responsibility for everything.
Right.
But as an investor, you can't take full responsibility for everything, because you don't have, if you're investing in something on the market, you don't have the ability to change how that performs on the market. You invest accordingly. Now you can help push that along by investing more, whatever, but it is an investment, not an ownership. So especially as they get older, I think that's more true than when they're younger. Because as you get more into that coaching stage where you're pouring into them, investing, and then you turn around and let them go and let them do their thing, and you go, yay, proud moment. Or you go, hey, come on, we got to regroup and we got to talk about this because we failed to see this, or we made a bad decision here, or whatever. Again, I think that's probably some of the other best advice too that I've had as a father. It's an investment, not ownership.
No, I think that's great. I've actually been, not with my children, but with other people in my life, have been kind of using that same analogy that, you don't own them. What you're doing is investing in their lives, and you have to think about it like you would invest in something else. I invest in this, understand anything I invest in. I understand there's a risk I could lose everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also understand there's a hope and a potential for growth. And if it grows, they're not going to come give me the keys to the store. I'm going to enjoy benefits. I'm going to get dividends. I'm going to get a little taste. Yep. And I'm going to know that, it's growing, it's getting bigger. And that's what you get. No, it's doing good. That is so old person, but there's not any greater gratification to me as a human being of fatherhood-ishness that has two grown children than, my folks are, you never call. And I'm like, you know what? When they don't call, that means nothing's going wrong. That means they're content.
Yeah.
They're happy as anyone else. Everything's fine if they're not calling.
Yeah.
And even sometimes when they call, everything's fine. Sometimes it's not. A little more times it's not. Yeah. But and it's like, this is what you get. This is the benefit. This is the dividend. Knowing that those people are all right. Yeah. I don't have to sit here and worry about them. It doesn't mean that I'm not worried that bad things can happen, but you dwell on that about anything. But I'm not worried about who they are.
Yeah.
I could have done better. Wish I would have. Did a lot of damage unintentionally. I think we all do. But again, it's hard to grasp the full depth of what it means to be forming another human being. Mm-hmm. And who can spin all those plates? I mean, all the stuff that they see and that they experience, and how they're receiving it, and how they're processing who you are through it. And just the whole experience of growing and living on planet Earth, and the things that your eyes are just forced open on a daily basis, and it's like, they're spongy little people that are taking everything in, and it's like, be careful what you put in there,
For sure.
because you can't take any of it back out. It'll have effect to lesser and greater degrees, and you don't know what that is until down the road, and then you'll be able to assess and regret, and that's all.
Yeah.
You might get lucky enough to get to repair some of the damage that gets done, but we all get damaged in the process. It's just part of living on this planet. We all take some damage on the way up.
And for a parent, sometimes it's just to be there when they fall.
Most of the time,
you just have a shoulder to cry on. All right,
you can't, and you don't want to help them avoid the problems of life.
No, you can't. Yeah, you have to just, and sometimes that's all it needs to be, is be there. I think that's probably the biggest part of my parenting verbal repertoire that I've ever had was, hey, you know what? If you want to talk about it, here I am.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's all it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll never hear about it, and sometimes 3 months later they come back, hey, I want to ask you about this. Oh, really? Okay. So, sometimes
there was one of the most glorious moments that will resound in my heart forever was after Isabel moved to Springfield and started going to school, and I think it was after she'd been there a year, and she came home for the first summer, and we were sitting just one morning drinking coffee, watching TV, nothing big deal. She goes, hey, I just want to tell you, I'm really sorry I didn't listen to you. I was like, do what? She's like, well, growing up and stuff, you don't listen to your parents, and I didn't want to listen to you, but I just wanted you to know you were right about a lot of things. And it was like, okay, well, I'm just going to stick that air in this pocket, and every once in a while, that's there, I got that. So it'll all get fixed. They'll be all right if you stick together. Well, you said that. You can't do it alone. Right. You can't parent alone. You can't even parent alone without your kids involved. I mean, there's stuff you got to do without your kids involved, but it all affects them.
And I think I would go. That's great advice, because I think that we could take to. What I'm going to say. Oh, you've heard that say. Do you want to win, or do you want a relationship? So that's the question. And I think we've used that in marriage a lot. Mm-hmm. So do you want to be the winner of the argument, or do you want to have a relationship? So sometimes
we use that in ministry.
Yeah, well, and I think when it comes to rearing children as well, it's like, do you always want to be right? Because you can say that thing, and you're right, and be disagreed with, and 5 years later it comes back and they go, hey, I just want to tell you were right. Well, and they may never tell you. You may see it in their lives eventually. Oh, I told them about that. Yeah, and they're doing it.
I think that's the solid life advice that you can ask yourself anytime you're about to enter a conflict with another human being.
Right.
What's more value? Right. The win, or to be able to continue the conversation? Because you might get the win, but you will probably close the door on any further conversation.
Because when there's a winner, there's a what?
Loser.
Yes, and if we plan on winning every argument, that means we're constantly making our children losers, and we don't want to raise losers. We want to raise winners. And so I agree with that. That's a beautiful perspective, Doug. Do you want to win, or you want to keep the conversation open? Yes, I want to keep the conversation going. I want to keep the conversation going until I can't have a conversation anymore.
There's a really cool principle in like.
Nope, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Sorry, that was
in nature, where like animals and social animals will play games together to teach the young. But they know, even though they have the power, they can't just blow them out. They've got to let them win enough that they will stay in the game.
Right.
And it's like, oh, yeah, that's the deal. You don't want to just win. I mean, people that win, and you don't want to play games with them because that's all they care about is winning. No. The people that are fun to play with are people that let you stay in the game, so you don't feel like they're not letting them win. That's let them win. No. Let them have enough, I don't know, is it integrity as a human being? Enough human self-respect to stay in the game. Don't humiliate them. Don't rub them out. Don't let your pride become the important thing. Well, I was right. I told him right, and I called the spade a spade. Great.
Yeah.
Now you're done ever interacting with that human being again, which again I think is kind of what some people want. But we're talking about your kid. That's not what you want. You always want to retain the ability to go back and re-enter that conversation. You want to make sure that door's open for them.
Right.
They know they can come back and we can revisit this. This is, we may make a decision. This is how we're dealing with this today, but we can always talk about it. We can always reason with it.
Right. And that makes it easier to go back as a parent and say, you know what? I was wrong. Because the conversation is still open. You weren't pinned with a blue ribbon saying you're the champion and now we got to rip that off of you. When the conversation is still open and you get years down the road or months down the road or whatever, and you start to grow and learn something, you can go, hey, kid, I have to tell you something. I was wrong. You're right. I think this is the best way to approach this. Whatever. That's and all that does is build respect and honor for you in their minds. So.
It's what you're doing. What I think of it as is like, well, just like the not freaking out when they listen to music you don't like. I call it pulling teeth. Mm-hmm. These things have teeth that can bite you. The best way to deal with them is to pull the teeth out. You take the teeth out by not reacting. You take the teeth out by going, we can always talk. That was something I always tried to drill my kids because I was like, man, please don't lie to me.
Yeah.
Don't lie to me. Don't get worried about punishment. Let's not do any of that stuff. Let's talk about what the issue is. Let's work out the issue. I don't want to punish you. You don't want to be punished. Well, here's a way we can both avoid that, is if we talk.
Yeah.
If we can have a conversation. And so I tried to always, and this is worthwhile, but man, this is hard. But when you got a friend like Mark Walker setting an example for you, it's freaking hard to ignore. Is to be a guy whose kids could say anything to him, no matter how hard or rough or difficult or what mistake they have made, and I'm not going to react. I'm going to listen, I'm going to think, and I'm going to respond, but I'm not going to react. And that, again, is part of a strategy to keep the door open.
Yep.
When you close doors on people, they take that message real serious.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
and I think Deborah's probably the champion. I would easily give her the win on that. That been able to keep that conversation open to where it's like, and she tried to tell our daughter that from the very beginning. It's like, okay, we agree. Anytime you want me to come pick you up, no questions asked. You can call me. I can come pick you up. No, we'll talk about it later, as long as we get to talk about it. I'm not going to be mad. It's just, And so, that expectation was made up front. And I know that's as they get a little bit older and you start, relinquishing their freedom a little bit more to do things. And they have to understand. Joe McGee always talked about, and since you mentioned Joe McGee, I remember him talking about punishment only came for a few things in the house. One of them was lying. One of them was lying, talking back to your mom, and something else.
I remember listening to that one. That affected listening to that one thing affected everything I did parent-wise.
And he said that put that on a poster board, put it on the underside of the toilet lid, so every time they picked it up, they saw and they realized those are the three things that I could get a whooping or get grounded for. And then everything else was a conversation, but those pinnacle things were they got capital punishment for.
Right.
So and then that way there's no there's no question to whatever. They don't bring that thing up and then I'm gonna whoop you until you scream and run out of here. Yeah,
it's so much more satisfying because I'm your dad and I said so. Like, oh, we can actually sit down and talk about this.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, that's a great thing that stuck with my kids. Joe McGee's like simple, basic, clear rules. Here, just that thing you just talked about. I remember listening to that tape with you probably in your Isuzu rodeo.
Oh, yes.
But I remember hearing that going, that's how my house was. My dad was the dad of ambiguous rules. I did you always enjoy my comedy bits in the car. I did a comedy bit for a group of people the other day about my dad's ambiguous rules. And like when my mom was in the hospital when I was a kid and my dad was taking care of us and my grandma came because it was like one of those protracted hospital stay deals. And I stepped on something one day, like a piece of glass or something. And so the new rule was you had to wear shoes and socks from the time you got up until you went to bed. And it was just like immediately instituted, no vote, no hope of a veto. Nobody's going to step in and save you. Just boom.
The Gentlementor.